Hi everyone, and welcome to my beginner's guide for Last Epoch in Season 2. If you're completely new to the game or thinking about trying it out, then I have some valuable information for you that will make your start a little bit easier. Last Epoch's Season 2 update, patch 1.2, is a massive overhaul to the endgame and brings tons of new crafting features, which makes the game just even better in what it already does really well. So a lot of the veteran players, including myself, are really excited to jump in again. But I also think a lot of new people are coming to try it out and maybe find something new to scratch their ARPG itch. And this might be just it. While at it, I also want to say a big thank you to EHG, the creators of Last Epoch, for sponsoring this video. So they have been collaborating with me here, and I make this video for you guys. Now let's jump in with the first point. I think one of the biggest advantages of Last Epoch is the approachability and the build variety in this game. Every class has something like 24 or so skills to choose from. So we have this here right now, for example, this is a rogue, and we have a bunch of base skills that are open for everyone playing this class. And then there are the so-called masteries, where you can specialize into 1 out of 3 masteries, basically like a subclass later on. And they also open up more skills and more choices. And the cool thing about Last Epoch is that you constantly are evolving your character, and it's not very complicated to do so. The game is very approachable because the stats are very clearly defined. Tooltips explain things in very much detail, and you have, for example, here on the tooltips also the scaling tags that tell you which stats you need to go for in order to make a certain skill do more damage, for example. So most of the gearing up process is relatively straightforward. You don't have to really worry too much about which stats actually apply to a certain skill or not, because it's usually very clearly laid out. And not just that, but many of these skills can become either like a damaging ability or some kind of like supporting ability, because they also have a lot of flexibility in how they can be used, but more on that in a second. And what this means is that it can be kind of successful with pretty much everything that you make in the game, even if it's not necessarily like a top meta build or something like that. But I do have to say the build variety is really good in Last Epoch. So we see this here, for example, with the Maxwell guides. If you look at all of the different builds that we have, there is tons of different playstyles available. All the typical archetypes are covered in Last Epoch, and everything just kind of works. Some better than others, but there is a lot of stuff to explore. And there's a ton of stuff that even myself I have not done yet. In total, there are 5 different classes to choose from, each with 3 different masteries. So there's the Sentinel, which is like a melee guy mostly. Then you have the Rogue, which is like with agile and ranger kind of character. We have the mage, we have the primalist that can be like an animal and like a shape-shifting kind of guy, and nature magic, and acolyte, which is like a lot of like undead and minions and these kind of things. Not only that, but when you create a new character, you also have the option to create it in different game modes. So you can choose normal and hardcore, just like normal in most other games, but you also have solo account found or solo character found if that is what you like to do. In fact, you can even go and play completely offline in this game, which is also like a huge advantage here. So for example, when you don't have the connection, or when the servers are down, or you also have like no lag or something like that, you can actually just go to offline mode and you can play characters there. Now, next point, the skill trees and the respecking in this game are extremely simple as well, but still offer just the right amount of complexity to make things really interesting. So not only does every class have a ton of skills, but every single skill that you see here also has its own skill tree. So you can just click on these and you can specialize up to 5 skills, which you also have on your bar. So usually those are exactly the same skills. And then you can choose lots of different, variety of effects in order to maybe buff the damage, make them faster, or even convert the skills to something else entirely. So for example, sometimes you have like a cold spell, but something on the skill tree says it is now converted to fire. Or here, for example, I convert physical to cold. And there's tons of little things like that on these skill trees where you can change the behavior of a certain skill. This is also something I alluded to earlier. Sometimes you can add a cooldown, you can remove a cooldown, you can make a damaging skill into a support ability. So there's tons of variety of different effects that you can choose from, and actually enable lots of different playstyles, even with similar skills chosen on the class. And the game really encourages you to experiment as well and kind of grow your character as you go. So you might see something here on the skill tree and you might want to try it out and notice it's not really quite the thing that you wanted. Well, you can also respec them very easily. So you can just remove points again one by one, something like this, and then it will kind of de-level the skill and you just level it up again, and it actually catches up very fast. So even when you take out these points here, you lose temporary power, but after a few minutes you will get it back. You also have the passives, so this is just something that you progress as you level up, and you get a few from, for example, the campaign. There are some extra passive points. So every class has this kind of basic tree that applies to all of its masteries, and then you have the mastery trees here. So they are a little bit more complex and larger. And you see here that, well, when you choose, for example, a shaman like I am, I have the entire tree unlocked. I can go all the way to the right here. It goes from left to right. And for the other two masteries, you can still invest into those, but only up to the halfway mark, basically. So you see here, there's like a gate and you can't go through that. This is only open to those specific masteries. So this allows you to specialize into certain things while still keeping it flexible. And you can actually choose, you know, to pick up some things here from the other masteries. You can even choose some of those skills from the other masteries here that you unlock by putting points in those trees. So there's actually a lot of like overlap and flexibility, but there is still also, you know, certain kind of class fantasy and the fantasy behind certain masteries that is kept with and walking it behind this. And it's kind of the same story here. You also have a very easy time making choices, trying out things and respecking if you don't want it. There's like a NPC here. You can just spend a lot of gold, and you can also just respec a lot of stuff there. Now let's talk about the next point, the crafting and the gear acquisition in this game. It is probably the best system in ARPGs out there in my book. It is a ton of fun to make your own gear, find your own gear, and craft exactly the steps that you want, because there's a lot of deterministic crafting, but there's also just the right amount of RNG to either succeed or fail. And it just makes it like a really fun mix. So just like many other games, there are different varieties of items. There's like white, blue, yellow, and so on. And then there are these purple items, which are called Exalted, which have the added advantage that they have a higher tier of a stat that is drop only. So there are 5 tiers of mods, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it goes up and it becomes more powerful. And then there's 6 and 7, which are the purple items here. This is drop only. So you find this loot and then you craft on that, at least later on in the game. In the early campaign, you don't really find these. You only rely on like blue items and rare items, and then it kind of like goes up as you go. But those are the items that you usually craft on the most. And in order to do so, you have the forge. So you can just open this as like a little interface, and you can put an item in there and you can start manipulating stats on these items. Everything comes with 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes maximum. So you see those here on the left and on the right. And then you can choose to just change one of these affixes with your crafting materials that you gathered. So for example, this void resistance. If I don't really want that, well, we can try to change that into something else. There's the glyph of chaos that randomly rerolls this stat into another one. And now we got physical resistance. Or if I really like this stat, I can choose to upgrade it to make it a higher tier. And you see here we have this forging potential at the top. As long as there is forging potential left and every craft costs a little bit with a bit of RNG, you can still keep manipulating the item. You can change the roles of the implicits, the roles of the stats. You can change the stats themselves, as I just shown. And there's also, for example, some option to like remove a stat entirely. So if I, let's say, want to remove one of those stats here as a rune of removal, I can completely rid of one of them. And now we have an open prefix, and I can literally craft whatever I want as long as there's an open slot. So you just do this and you put dexterity, which is good for my rogue. There are also much more complicated crafting methods later on. I don't want to go too much into details here because that warrants its own like half-hour video at least. But there is a lot of cool features in this game. There's also unique items that you can craft further with this legendary potential. You see this on my bow, for example, right now. Legendary potential, for example, allows you to take a stat of one of those exalted items here. So let's say I have like a bow that has a legendary potential, and then we take an exalted bow. I could try to take one of those stats from the one on the right and put it on my unique item. This is also like a pretty important endgame crafting system, and it allows you to actually manipulate those unique items in order to stay viable throughout the late game. And it's not just you find a unique item and you're done forever. You can still keep going and keep making them better, which is pretty cool. But as I mentioned, this only really scratches the surface. I gotta say, TLDR, this is a very fun crafting system, and it's about to get a lot better in patch 1.2 as well. Next up, we have loot filters and quality of life. So this game has built-in loot filter systems. You can just open this here, and you can add up to 75 rules of either showing some items, recoloring, adding some emphasis, or even hiding items altogether. And this is like a very good way to just kind of like make a loot filter for your character that shows exactly what you want, and you don't actually have to pick up all these items that drop for you. The game is relatively randomized with the loot, so you can find a lot of stuff that is not for your character, not for your build. It doesn't have this kind of like smart loot system, at least to that degree as like Diablo. And instead, you have the loot filters, and you can make anything show that you want, which is very nice because especially as you progress through the later stages, you can then decide to, for example, not show helmets anymore. If you think your helmet is done, well, you just hide them. Not only that, but you can even filter for the exact attributes that you want, like the prefixes and suffixes on your gear. You can choose exactly the stats you want to see because you don't have to identify loot in this game. So the items just drop, and you can just filter exactly for the stuff that you want to see. There's a lot of quality of life built into this feature as well. So for example, if you see this here, if I take this quiver, it is currently just hidden on my filter, but I can also like turn it off and then I can see it. And not only that, but you can actually open the loot filter UI here, and then you can press this button to show all the loot on the ground, and it will tell you that rule 40 is the one that actually influences what it shows. And in this case here, it's just like a hide basically everything kind of rule that I have at the end, because this item just didn't go through all of my other rules. So you can just build up a system where, you know, you have like the most important stuff at the top, and then further down, those rules get superseded by those above. So this system might seem like quite a lot at the start, but it's actually fairly simple to set up if you want to make your own filter. There's also obviously a lot of community filters out there. For example, when you follow a Maximal Guide, all of those have filters, but I like to make my own. And this is very simple to do. You just choose, you know, the item type, you choose rarity, you can filter by faction requirement, and so on. There's a lot of stuff. There's also a ton of other quality of life features built into the game. For example, there's the in-game game guide that actually gives you like explanations about how stuff works in this game, including some of those calculations of, you know, for example, how does block work? You can just search it here. Or if you don't know, like, how does ignite work? Well, you have that here as well. And it actually tells you exactly what is going on. You have crafting materials that are automatically picked up and stored. You don't have to like clutter your inventory, for example. You have the stash system as well, which is like basically a nearly infinite stash. You can just keep adding for gold. You can just find gold and then buy it. You don't have to pay anything like in Path of Exile, for example. And you can just keep adding stuff. And you see here, you can also make categories. You can recolor them. You can even set stash affinities so that certain items directly go in that tab here. You can, similar to the loot filters, basically, you can make certain rules. And, you know, all of my exalted rings go here and all of my exalted weapons go there. And it's like very neat to sort all your stuff. And last but not least, let's talk about the end game a little bit. So this is the world map here right now where I am in the end game. And the way this works is that it's a little bit like mapping, basically, for example, where you have these different timelines, and each of those timelines has like specific layouts, monsters and bosses, and you can farm them for different purposes and for different targeted loot. So you go here and you can choose to run these so-called echoes as you go through this web of echoes, basically, and it kind of keeps expanding, so you kind of discover more and more. You see these little lines that connect them, and you kind of go outwards and try to find different rewards, fight different bosses, and this is how you progress your endgame system. You also have a lot of flexibility with the difficulty of the game. So for example, if you are playing like a relatively weak build, you can farm on like a somewhat low difficulty. This is this system of corruption here. Corruption scales up the health and the damage of monsters, but it also gives you more XP and more loot. So you kind of want to go high, but you don't have to go after a certain point. So there's like a relatively approachable minimum threshold that you want to reach. And after that, it just gets a bit better, basically. But for those people that want to go really ham, you actually can scale this infinitely. You can go as high as you want for corruption, make stuff as hard as you want. And you can just see how far you get, for example. So that's also pretty fun. Not only that, but patch 1.2, which is about to launch, also introduces the Weaver tree, which is part of the new faction that is coming, and that allows you to customize your endgame experience to a high degree. You can add extra monster packs of a certain kind, extra special encounters. You can find random bosses. You can, you know, choose to like not have certain rewards on your echoes and then more of the other rewards. You can choose to actually completely block certain echo types that you don't want to run. There's lots of stuff on this tree here that allows you to customize what you are playing and also what you are getting for doing so. You can even like go and hunt specific items exactly through this tree. So this actually allows a lot of cool flexibility here with this Weaver tree, and you can spend up to 50 points in this. So I think this is also going to be a huge deal for improving the end game. And that pretty much covers like a base overview of the game. So there's obviously a lot more stuff to discover. So I do recommend to go check out some guides. I'll also have some videos of my own. But for example, the Maxwell guys here have been hard at work to bring you updated build guides. You can go check those out. They're easy to follow. There's leveling guides, one for each class. That just gives you like the meta strategy, for example, and then tons of endgame guides. You can check out the tier lists here, for example. There's different tier lists to look at. For example, for like overall performance, I would probably go with endgame and corruption tier list here. And you can see what are the options here. Another good resource to check out is also Last Epoch tools. So this is this website here. So they have a lot of like kind of background knowledge as well. For example, what are the affixes that can roll on certain items, with what chance, how high can it go. So this stuff is, for example, laid out here in some of the resources. So that's also cool to check out if you want to go dive in a bit more deeply. There's also Tank Lab, which has, for example, stuff like this here. How does block work at certain block values and these kind of things. So if you really want to dive deep, then you can go further like that. I will link all of that stuff down in the description. Lastly, for those people that want to be a bit more fancy, there's also the appearances that you can change here. So there's like an in-game shop. You can see this here. This works a bit similar to Path of Exile, for example, with the MTX. You can buy like, wings, bank attachments, armor sets, glow effects, evade effects, tons of stuff basically. There's the supporter packs as well. So if you are really liking the game, then I really recommend to go check this out, support the developers, and maybe you're gonna get something cool while you're at it. And for those of you who are on the fence of actually buying the game, if you don't have it yet, I also have my Nexus store here. So if you want to support me while getting Last Epoch, you can check out this link here, nexus.gg/wudijo. I have Last Epoch here. You can buy it for the same price as you would otherwise get it on Steam, but it also supports my channel a little bit. So thank you very much for that. And that also sums it up for this video here. So I hope you enjoyed this. I wish you good luck when you're starting out on Last Epoch. Personally, I am very excited for this update. I'll be blasting, I'll be streaming. There's a huge world first hardcore race going on that I will be participating in. Hopefully that's gonna go well, let's see. And yeah, otherwise, I think the hype is real and a lot of people are looking forward to this. So hope you are too. Hope you liked this video and I'll see you guys next time.